Hello, I'm Esther Githu. It's Thursday, August 24th. This is Africa 54. Zimbabweans were called back to vote on Thursday in 40 wards affected by delays and shortages of ballot papers that Electoral Commission blamed on legal problems it faced ahead of the polls. We'll have a report from Harare. Residents of Andre in Chad show acts of kindness to Sudanese refugees fleeing the war in their home country. And 8 Republicans who want to be president of the United States shared a stage Wednesday night in Wisconsin for their party's first debate ahead of next year's election. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin in Zimbabwe, where voters were called back to vote on Thursday in 40 wards affected by delays during Wednesday's elections. Meanwhile, the director of Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights says police had detained about 40 members of 2 civil society groups late Wednesday and raided their offices. Columbus Mavunga has more from Harare.
Armed riot police were called in at this polling station to start elections more than an hour after the polls were supposed to close. Voters said they had been waiting for ballot papers for more than 12 hours. One of them is an angry Marufu Mandevere.
I don't think this is still an election. Election was supposed to close at 7 p.m. and many people have already left. And now they are opening the election polling stations at the close of the election. There's chaos, as you can see.
Another one is Sabina Tera, who thinks Zimbabwe Electoral Commission officials are playing games about the voting material.
We don't know what's really happening because we don't see the ballot papers getting in, which means that the papers were in there since morning. I've been sitting by the door, but I don't see them getting the papers in.
The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission issued a statement saying the delays were due to heavy litigation it faced ahead of the general election, pitting 80-year-old incumbent President Emmerson Mnangagwa against 10 candidates. He cast his vote in his hometown of Kwekwe, about a 3-hour drive from Harare.
If I think I'm not going to take it, then I'll be foolish. Everyone who contests, if you're going to rest to win. And precisely is what I'm doing.
His main challenger, Nelson Chamisa of the Citizens Coalition for Change Party, cast his ballot in Harare. He complained about the delays to open the polls and pamphlets purporting to be from him urging supporters not to vote. But he was optimistic of victory.
This is a repeat of what they did in 2002. They are trying to confuse people, but the people know what they want. They will vote. They are not going to be misled. And we are ready to form a next government. We are ready to be installing a government for everyone. And we are happy.
Voter Lorraine Madziwa sums up the issues at stake in this Zimbabwean election.
We want industries to start working, and people should have decent houses. We want houses in this area of Mbare renovated, as well as playing grounds and schools. Our children can't use the playgrounds because of their condition. Sewage is all over. That's what I want addressed.
But change is not for everyone, including voter April Kunongam. He wants the Zimbabwe of 2017, when Mnangagwa removed then-President Robert Mugabe from power.
When it removed Mugabe's government, it started repairing roads, installing boreholes and irrigation pipes, as well as so many projects.
Presidential results are expected by Monday, while parliamentary results are expected to start trickling in Thursday morning in areas where there were no delays. Columbus Mavunga, VOA News, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Sudan's Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan appeared in a video circulated by the army on Thursday outside of the Army Command compound in Khartoum for the first time since the beginning of a war more than 4 months ago. The video appearance comes after the Rapid Support Forces attack on the Armored Corps base in southern Khartoum. The army has been fighting the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces for control of the capital and several major cities since April 15. Attempts to mediate have proven fruitless, as diplomats say both sides still believe they can win. More than 200,000 refugees fleeing Sudan's civil war have arrived in the town of Adre, Chad, since the middle of June. Before the crisis, the town had a record population of just 40,000. Henry Wilkins asked Adre residents and newly arrived refugees what they are doing to help the vast influx of new residents.
Hagan Ali Zorgan is a humanitarian activist and resident of Adre, a town in Chad across the border from Sudan's chronically troubled Darfur region. More than 200,000 Sudanese refugees have arrived in the town in recent weeks, fleeing fighting in Darfur and attacks against civilians. They've built makeshift shelters in the countryside that surrounds Adre, as far as the eye can see.
From a humanitarian point of view, we can't just leave people to suffer like this. They are very tired and sick. The latest arrivals were stuck in Janina for more than 3 months. Some have volunteered to help cook for refugees. They've brought flour and sugar. That is humanitarian. They are our people, and we care about them.
Zorgan has started a TikTok channel to raise awareness about the refugees' plight. He interviews them and documents local efforts to help them. His channel has attracted tens of thousands of views. Residents of the towns hosting the refugees, as well as refugees themselves, have been playing a vital role in assisting those in need, complementing the international response. Nonetheless, the suffering of the refugees in Adre is great. Salima Abdallah Idris Ishak has just arrived carrying all of her possessions. She says ethnic Arab militia groups attacked civilians and pushed them out of Sudan.
They told us that homes don't belong to us, they belong to them. They said that the country is theirs and we don't have the right to anything here.
Some refugees have lent their skills to helping those like Ishak, who are newly displaced by the conflict. Dr. Mohammed Mustafa fled the Sudanese city of Janina, which has been ripped apart by the war 2 months ago. He now volunteers at this medical centre that non-profit set up in the Adre camp.
Since I am one of the refugees, so I see the pain of the people. We mainly targeted the women and the children because they are the most vulnerable. We have a small clinic and we have a small laboratory for minor investigation, and we have minor operation room for the wounds and cleaning and stuff, and we have a pharmacy.
The top official in Adre says helping refugees is part of the fabric of the town. It previously welcomed refugees from the Darfur War that began in 2003.
They have been living with us for 20 years now, and they have the same rights and are equal to us. They've benefited from non-profits here providing health and education.
Thousands more refugees are expected to arrive in Adre in the coming weeks and months as the war in Sudan drags on. Henry Wilkins, VOA News, Adre, Chad.
Russian authorities say the head of the Wagner mercenary group was killed Wednesday in a plane crash north of Moscow. Russia's Civil Aviation Authority said Yevgeny Prigozhin was among 10 people on board the private jet that went down en route from Moscow to St. Petersburg. The crash comes 2 months after Prigozhin led a brief rebellion against the Russian military that Russian President Vladimir Putin labeled treason. The mutiny ended with Prigozhin agreeing to go to Belarus, but he made multiple subsequent appearances in Russia. Wagner forces were involved in some of the heaviest fighting in Russia's war in Ukraine, including the capture of the city of Bakhmut. Now, for more on the death of Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, I'm joined live via Skype from here in Washington, D.C. by Joseph Siegel, Director of Research, Africa Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University and an expert on Russian issues. Mr. Siegel, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what do you make of Prigozhin's death and lack of comment from Russia's President, Vladimir Putin?
Well, this is clearly a statement from Putin to get rid of a rival and to send a signal to other would-be challengers in Russia that their dissent will not be tolerated. It isn't surprising to me that Putin hasn't commented because there's nothing he can say that will send a stronger signal than what has just happened with the downing of Prigozhin's plane.
So now with Prigozhin dead, what impact do you think this will have on the Wagner Group?
Well, I think it will have a very extensive impact. In many ways, Wagner was Prigozhin. Wagner wasn't just a single group, but really it was a combination of entities all controlled by Prigozhin, and it included the paramilitary mercenary force. It included disinformation. It included election interference. It included arms for minerals swaps. All of this was coordinated by Prigozhin in the interest of co-opting and helping prop up different African leaders, and in the process advancing Russian political influence in Africa. So Prigozhin's demise will be very damaging to Wagner's efforts on the continent.
We know you mentioned, the Wagner Group being in Africa. They are still operating there. Nobody knew that Prigozhin would be dead, yesterday, and today that's another story altogether. What's likely to be the role of the Wagner Group now operating in Africa? We know they've infiltrated the judiciary in some of the countries in Africa, as well as in intelligence. What should be their role be? Do you think they will continue operating now that Prigozhin is dead?
Well, I think what we'll see is that Russia will try to continue some of the activities that Wagner has been doing. They'll try to do that through state structures, as well as potentially other oligarchs who will try to step in and work in the same way that Wagner did. But I think that'll be very difficult to do, because it was really this multifaceted nature of what Wagner's activities involved. Many of these are illicit activities that are the main ways that Russia was gaining influence. It was through the irregular channels. It wasn't through conventional means like trade or investment or development assistance. And moreover, Wagner was, allegedly involved in extensive human rights abuses. And if this is something that the Russian state is now going to take control over, and Vladimir Putin himself said after the rebellion that, that Russia has always supported Wagner, then effectively that means that the Russian state is responsible for these human rights abuses. And so the plausible deniability that Wagner has provided Russia will no longer be in place.
Mr. Sego, critics of Vladimir Putin have died mysteriously. There has been a string of them, some poisoned, others, just disappeared. What does this plane crash say about Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think it starkly reminds people that the Russian state under Putin is effectively operating as a criminal organization. If there was genuinely a concern about Prigozhin, then that should have been handled through the courts. The fact that he and other political rivals are simply eliminated, I think sends a chilling signal about just how the Russian government under Putin operates. And I think that has some very important takeaways for African leaders who may entertain engaging Russia, that they need to understand that they may be getting more than they bargained for. And it really underscores the ruthlessness with which Putin sees himself and the Russian state. And, Putin often talks about wanting to create a new international order that moves away from the UN-based rules order. And I think this incident with the downing of Prigozhin's plane is an example of what that world order would look like.
Joe, many thanks for your insight.
Thank you very much.
Joseph Segal is Director of Research Africa Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover here. Join us on our program's website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, 8 Republicans who want to be president of the United States share a stage for their party's first debate ahead of next year's election. We'll be right back.
Since 2010, the Young African Leaders Initiative, or YALI, has brought 500 young people from across Africa to the United States. The fellows selected for the highly competitive Washington Fellowship Program have a proven record of accomplishment in promoting innovation and positive change in their organizations, institutions, or communities. On the next edition of Our Voices, we will introduce you to some extraordinary young African women to share their experiences in the Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders program. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
In other news, a 2-story building collapsed in Nigeria's capital city of Abuja late on Wednesday, with at least 2 people dead and many others reportedly still trapped as emergency responders evacuate those injured to the hospital. The building was used for both residential and commercial purposes. Rwandan President Paul Kagame has threatened to round up Catholic faithfuls who visit a global pilgrimage site in his country, accusing them of worshipping poverty. Every year, thousands of people who visit Kibeho, a town in southern Rwanda where the Virgin Mary is said to have appeared to 3 schoolgirls 4 decades ago. More than 4 million people have been driven from their homes in Ethiopia, mainly by conflict or drought, according to new UN figures. The International Organization for Migration report says more than 4 million people are internally displaced, with more than 1 million of them displaced in the war-scarred region of Tigray. Activists want a deal between Tunisia and Libya to share responsibility for hundreds of sub-Saharan African migrants once stranded on their shared border, risks the migrants' rights and doesn't solve the core problem. Lisa Bryant has our report from Tunis.
Joseph Milk from Liberia found a home and a job in Tunisia after crossing the Sahara Desert 5 years ago, hoping to save enough money for an illegal boat ride to Europe. Instead, he ended up at this informal migrant camp in Tunis. Milk said his life changed in February when Tunisian President Kais Saied denounced illegal migration, suggesting sub-Saharan African migrants were changing the country's demographic makeup.
My boss told me to leave the work, the house I was staying in. The house owner told me to leave the house. So everything changed and I became homeless.
Tunisia's government denies claims it is carrying out collective expulsions. Rights groups and media reports say Tunisian authorities last month sent hundreds of other African migrants to the desert near the border with Libya after clashes with locals in the southern city of Sfax. That didn't stop the European Union from striking a deal with Tunisia to control illegal migration to its shores, prompting a warning from human rights advocates.
Pushing for this cooperation and more control on migration can only lead in this context to more abuse against black migrants, but also Tunisians.
Critics accuse Tunisia's government of fostering a climate of hate and violence against sub-Saharan African migrants, which authorities deny.
To see people feeling unwelcomed and attacked in my country, for me, is very heartbreaking.
VOA is protecting the identity of this migrant from the Democratic Republic of Congo. He says he's afraid to leave his Tunis apartment after being stopped by police, despite having legal papers. At the Tunis camp, African migrants rely on the kindness of strangers and begging to get by, unable to move on and unwilling to return home. Lisa Bryant for VOA News, Tunis.
8 Republicans who want to be president of the United States shared a stage Wednesday night in Wisconsin for their party's first debate ahead of next year's election. VOA's chief national correspondent Steve Herman has more from Milwaukee.
The 2-hour debate, the first held by Republicans in this election cycle, featured spirited exchanges about what one of the moderators called the elephant who is not in the room, the absent party frontrunner, former President Donald Trump. Some of the contenders, such as Trump's former Vice President Mike Pence and former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, deemed Trump disqualified from serving again because of what they said was his disrespect for the Constitution, as well as the more than 90 felony counts he now faces. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley declared, "Trump is the most disliked politician in America. We can't win a general election that way." However, political novice Vivek Ramaswamy, rising in the polls, stood by Trump, saying he believed he was the best president of the 21st century. Ramaswamy also stood apart in questioning American support for Ukraine, saying China is a bigger threat to the United States than Russia. Several other candidates, including Haley, also a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, expressed strong support for Ukraine in defending itself against Russian forces. After the debate, Pence told reporters no one should have been surprised by his vigor on the debate stage.
And I was the leading champion of conservative values in the Trump-Pence administration. I know how to fight, and I was happy to bring that fight tonight.
Pence's primary sparring opponent of the evening, Ramaswamy, said he relished the verbal barrages directed at him by the former vice president.
Mike Pence kept coming at me with the experience differential. I think that's a great thing, because I don't think the people in this country are interested in going back to people who recite slogans they memorized in 1980.
The Republicans hold their second debate next month in California, but only one candidate will be back here on the same stage in Wisconsin next July to accept their party's nomination. Steve Herman, VOA News, Milwaukee.
BRICS leaders announced on Thursday the admission of 6 new countries from next year as the club of extensive and populous emerging economies seeks to reshape the global order. The BRICS, which stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, agreed at their annual summit to make Argentina, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates full members from January 1st, 2024. For more perspective, VOA's Paul Ndiho spoke to Paul Nantulia in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, a research specialist at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies in Washington, D.C.
From African government perspective,
This is the first BRICS that has been dedicated to Africa. That created quite a bit of buzz in different capital cities, including Dar es Salaam, where I'm speaking from. I think the key outcomes is a decision in principle to expand this coalition. As you know, a number of African countries have applied to join it. So I think that's one. I think besides the African countries, there are about 40 potential new applicants. So BRICS is essentially being seen as a multilateral organization that can provide an alternative platform to raise the influence and the interests of African countries and global South countries on the international stage. Commitment in principle to first of all recognize the African Continental Free Trade Area and to assist African countries in meeting their industrialization targets.
A lot of analysts have suggested that right now Africa is like a beautiful woman. Everybody is trying to court Africa. The BRICS are coming in. You have other organizations that are trying to come in. But ultimately, they all have an agenda. From your vantage point, what's that agenda?
If you look at countries like China, you look at countries like India, because really China and India are really the center of gravity in BRICS. We can't really talk about Russia because Russia's trade with Africa is very, very minimal. Russia needs African countries, needs African diplomatic support because of the diplomatic isolation that the Kremlin is facing. But India, countries like India and China and Brazil, the interests are much deeper. These are countries that have always seen the value of the African market. Secondly, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area has also increased that interest, right? And persuaded countries like China and India that there's actually there's an economic rationale for engagement.
There is talk about how these BRICS want to come up with their own quote-unquote currency, maybe to ditch the dollar. Is that a realistic thing that they can bring to bear?
The fact that African countries, together with Latin American and Asian countries and the People's Republic of China, are talking about creating a more diverse international system, creating a more multipolar world where the interests of poor countries can be served. I think it becomes very seductive in light of that. However, in the short to medium term, I don't think it's an easy objective to achieve, simply because all these countries, including China itself, is very well integrated in the dollar-denominated international financial system.
I think about 5 countries were invited to join, but there are others on the list who want to join this organization.
United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Iran definitely have an interest, a strategic interest. Argentina would also like to join this coalition. Egypt, Nigeria, Algeria, from the African continent also want to join, and they want to join. The primary reason is to really diversify international access to international finance. So among the BRICS members themselves, you have differences, and you really cannot talk about strategic unanimity on the issue of expansion when it comes to these core countries. But certainly the rhetoric and the symbolism, that is very, very seductive.
Thank you for joining us on Africa 54. See you back